Trade war between the United States and China has been taking a toll on some U.S. companies, but none more than Apple. What effect will it have on one of the biggest and most recognizable companies in the world? Joining us now to talk about how the latest round of tariffs could affect Apple in the coming months is Dan Ives, Managing Director of Equity Research at Wedbush Securities. So, Dan, price this out for us. If we get the 10% tariffs in September, which would apply to consumer electronics, what is the impact to Apple if they fully pay for that? What is the impact to Apple if they raise prices on their consumer and they end up buying fewer iPhones?
Yeah, it's a great question. Right now, we believe they do absorb it as of now. That ultimately, what that's going to do to EPS, that's really going to take off about 50 to 50 cents of EPS for them, about, call it 4 or 5%. And right now, for them, it's a conundrum because they basically, if they pass it along to the U.S. consumer, we think that would take off about 6 to 8 million iPhone units, which would be about 10% of U.S. demand. So that's why for them right now, the first they'll absorb it, but if it continues, they're ultimately going to have to pass it to the U.S. consumer.
When we talk about the number of iPhones, we talk about the hit to EPS. Do you have a dollar figure? Like, how much will Apple pay? Because every quarter we talk about how much cash the company has. It doesn't even know what to do with cash. It's buying back its stock. It's upping its dividend. So can it afford to foot that bill?
Look, it can afford it, but right now we think that's about $20 to $25 overhang in the stock because you take 50 cents off of 2020 EPS, and it could be more as it goes forward. That's why right now they almost have to absorb it because we've heard throughout Asia suppliers are not going to budge. They're not going to give any pricing concessions. And they know going into a massive iPhone cycle called 180, 185 million units, if they pass it to the U.S. consumer, that would take off about 10% of demand. And that's why for them right now, that's the balancing act for Cook and Cupertino, whereas at first they'll absorb it, but if it continues, they'll ultimately have to pass it along. And that continues to be the fear of the street here.
Why not change suppliers? I mean, I know the September 1st deadline for these tariffs. I mean, this sort of came out of nowhere for a lot of people watching the situation. But the ongoing tensions with China, especially for someone like Cook, who's been an emissary, essentially trading messages between leadership of both governments. I mean, he, of anyone, should know where this is headed and should be able to make company decisions and production decisions in response to that.
I think ultimately they thought they would get exempt. And I think it has come out of left field that they are not going to get exempt. And if you look at what they've done with Foxconn and with China, right now, best case, 5 to 7% of production, they can move to India or Vietnam, but that would take 18 months. So right now, they're the poster child for the trade war caught in the crossfires because they can't, just like the snap of their finger, move production there.
You said 5 to 7% would take 18 months. Mm-hmm. What if I told you you needed to move 50% of production?
At that point,
what is that? Is that
is it
3
just
years?
Impossible?
That's impossible? What's the...
I'd say 50% production would be best case 3 to 4 years. And ultimately, they've created such an ecosystem with Foxconn in China that right now they bet the farm there. So if they actually had to take production out of China, it would really be a disaster story for Apple. And that's why right now, that's the fear. That's why they're front and center in the trade war.
By the way, the flip side is if they were to take any of their business out of China, doesn't China, I mean, in the same way that China is so frustrated with us over Huawei, if there were really meaningfully lost jobs at a Foxconn plant, for example, does China say that's the cost of the tariffs in the same way that we're saying that's the cost of the tariffs on either the consumer or the American farmer? I mean, how do you think that works? Does it cut both ways or no?
Well, I think it does cut both ways because they're one of the most strategic employers in China.
Right.
If you look from the multiplier effect, at height, iPhone production, 1.4 million Chinese are employed by Apple. So that's why right now, the question is the tariffs, do they ultimately get exempt? And how does China react? Because the last thing China wants to see is Apple taking Foxconn to India, to Vietnam and other countries. That's the big issue right now.
Well, China also wants to drum up support for its own national tech giants like Huawei. And there's been some speculation that one way that China could retaliate is to effectively create a groundswell of consumer boycotts in China. I mean, you say that there are 60 to 70 million iPhones in China that are eligible for an upgrade soon. What are the odds that they say, you know what, I'm going to get a Huawei phone instead? I don't like the way that the U.S. is treating us. I don't want to support a U.S. company.
Yeah, I think that's really been the fear, the pro-Huawei, nationalistic, anti-Apple. it all does come down to 60 to 70 million iPhones are in the window of an upgrade in China. If you look globally, that's about 350 million, so about 20%. So I think that is a risk. But the one thing that we have seen a slight tick up in demand. You saw that this past quarter, and that is really the key right now. A lot of it comes down for them to pricing. I think when it comes down to this next iPhone, especially on the lower end version, I think they could cut prices in China. That's one of the things at their arsenal in terms of cooking Cupertino.
And what do you make of the rollout of the new Huawei operating system? Has it gotten more pickup than you expected, less? About the
I think it's still early to tell, but I do think that was a shot across the bow because Huawei is obviously going on the offensive as well, and that's why right now, this is really a battle for this next sort of smartphone cycle, especially going to 5G. And that's why it's so key, because every customer that moves out of the ecosystem for Apple is a lost services customer. And that's really the key to the valuation and really when you think about the Apple growth story going forward. And that's why this is such a crucial fork in the road period for Apple when it comes to these tariffs.
The administration has said all of the consumer products by design in this last tranche. Hope we don't get there, but we'll see come September 1st what actually happens. Dan, thank you.
Thank you.
Dan Ives.